Welcome to Indiana Football Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Indiana Football Weekly is brought to you by betnow.eu. Make sure you use the promo code TRUTH100 when you go to betnow.eu. I am your co-host for Indiana Football Weekly, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I'd like to welcome in my other co-host. Well, there is no other one, so my co-host, Cole Hanna. How you doing, Cole?
Well, Mike, I'm here to talk about that shit show of a game last week, so I can't say I'm doing great, but, I'm hanging in there.
All right, now, coming into the season, we knew the passing game was going to take center stage under Kalen DeBoer.
Yep.
But I never thought the running game would be as bad as it is with so much talent in the backfield. I do a CFL Weekly show with Robert Drummond, who lives up in the New York area, Syracuse area. Stevie Scott, he said, was a great running back, but he's yet to crack 65 yards on the ground yet. Has to be an offensive line problem, I would believe, because there's a ton of running backs here that should be able to get yardage. What's going on?
Yeah, you got to think it's an offensive line issue at this point. I mean, what Stevie Scott was able to do last year for them, I thought really kind of helped the offense run when maybe they didn't have the explosive plays in the passing game at times. But, the running game has just been downright bad for the majority of this year. And granted, in a game like against Ohio State, when Indiana clearly just was not getting any chunk and explosive plays in the passing game, and Ohio State was pretty routinely playing 7 to 8 guys within 4 to 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, it's going to be tough to run on that. Probably could have used Penix's arm there to open that up a little bit. But this is not a problem that's really just limited to Ohio State in a vacuum. They didn't run the ball as well as they would have liked against Ball State to start the season. You go into Eastern Illinois and they run the ball better, but still not probably up to expectation there. And then obviously it hit rock bottom against Ohio State, 31 carries for 42 yards in the game. I mean, that's just not going to get it done. And you've got to think the offensive line is, where this problem starts, where it needs to be fixed. They did lose a couple guys to the NFL that maybe we kind of underestimated the impact of losing those guys across the front seven. And they got some, a couple young guys slotted in there that they're playing along the offensive line. But it's just been absolutely atrocious. I thought one of the encouraging things across the offensive line was even though they were struggling to run block, they were at least doing a good job, I thought, of protecting Penix and giving him a clean pocket to work with. That completely just did not hold up at all against Ohio State. And I know they have a talented front seven, but, Ramsey was getting hit pretty much every other play, was being forced to make quick decisions. It was just not a good performance at all for the offensive line. And honestly, I got to be honest, I'm kind of at panic mode here at the offensive line. They've got to fix this, but it's been 3 weeks now and it hasn't been fixed. And if they can't run the ball effectively against Ball State, if they can't run the ball effectively against Eastern Illinois, you got to wonder, okay, who are they going to run the ball effectively against? And when you have a talented backfield like they do, I think Stevie Scott's a good running back. Samson James was highly touted coming out of high school, Colt Guest, Ronnie Walker. Those guys, if you give them holes to run through, they can get you good yards and yards after contact. But right now, there just aren't any holes for those guys to run through.
Well, how about this? I think defense is the bigger concern. The defense seemed to put it into that conversation against Eastern Illinois, but we would have to drop down a level of college football to be good at defense. Ohio State ran for 306 yards on 42 carries. Indiana's run defense has to be one of the worst in the country. J.K. Dobbins pretty much spent the day bouncing off multiple tackles on each drive. He had 8.7 yards per carry. This is sickening, and it goes back to Tom Allen, because football teams mirror their head coach. And my guess is they're not that tough, because up front on both sides of the ball, they get their ass kicked. And we keep hearing how he's recruiting better. But all they do is seem to lose when they play teams that are slightly above average or better. And you can't win if you can't recruit in the Big Ten. And you talked about lost a couple players to the NFL. Well, hell, Ohio State loses half their team to the NFL every year, and they still win. So he's in his third year. I don't see where this is getting any better.
Yeah, no, defensively, definitely. Unfortunately, they've kind of regressed over the last few years. I mean, when Tom Allen first got here, that turnaround they had at defense was remarkable, and how they went from one of the worst defenses in the country to one of the more respectable defenses in the Big Ten. And then ever since that point, they've kind of just slowly regressed year after year. Then obviously that performance against Ohio State was just rock bottom. I want to say in that 55-yard touchdown run for J.K. Dobbins, he had to have broken 7 or 8 tackles on that one play alone. I mean, when you looked at Week 1 against Ball State, they had some serious tackling issues in that game. It didn't cost them because you're playing an opponent like Ball State, but they kind of fixed it against Eastern Illinois. You're kind of hoping that would be the end of it. And they get to this week, and, it's like playing ping pong there kind of with J.K. Dobbins. You got, defenders bouncing off him pretty much every play, racking up a lot of yards after contact there. And, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head here. I mean, IU was just getting pretty much bullied in the trenches throughout the game. I mean, the Indiana defensive linemen were getting blown 3 to 4 yards off the ball pretty much whenever Ohio State wanted to run the football. There are very few run plays I can remember where IU limited them to a 4 or 5 yard gain. I mean, that was pretty much the best case scenario for most of the afternoon for IU was, hey, we stopped them to a 4 yard gain on a handoff. It was just pretty much domination from Ohio State in the trenches, and it wasn't even close. And it's not like the secondary was much better. I mean, when Justin Fields wanted to go downfield, there were people open. Yeah, it was – unfortunately, a complete and utter meltdown in all 3 phases for IU. We can sit here and talk about, obviously the run defense is worrying, but there was really not an area that IU performed well in this game. I mean, pretty much unanimously across the board, it was just domination from Ohio State. You kind of hope it's a fluke game, but some of these trends that we saw against Ohio State were not new trends. It was just exasperated by the fact that they're playing a team like Ohio State with the talent they have.
Well, and are there many places where Ohio State can go on the road, show up, and have thousands of empty seats?
No. No, unfortunately not. And the sad part about that is that's a good crowd for Indiana football standards. And there's still, like you said, thousands of open seats. I believe the announced attendance was like 48,000. So you're talking 4,000 to 5,000 open seats still in that stadium.
And there was
obviously just a really disappointing crowd. I don't think so either.
No.
So there's a few thousand stragglers sitting outside tailgating still, I think. But
because they knew it was
obviously
happen,
really disappointing. But
instead.
Like you can't blame them. I'm sure they had a better time out there than we were having inside the stadium. So can't blame them.
All right, next up, Indiana will face UCONN. I'm sure the crowd will be enormous there. UCONN was one of the worst teams in FBS last year. They had a miserable 1-11 campaign. The only victory was 56-49 in a shootout over Rhode Island, which that's always a huge win. And I think it's fair to say here, Randy Edsall, second stint in Stores, isn't doing as well as he did in his first stint. He even led the Huskies to a Fiesta Bowl berth before going to Maryland. He's 4-20 right now. In an attempt to right the ship, Edsall replaced both the offensive and defensive coordinator positions during the off season. What do you expect from the Huskies?
I'm just going to be blunt here. They're just not a very good football team. Week 1, they just etched out a victory against Wagner at home. Obviously not the highest quality of competition there. Now, they did play a Big Ten opponent in Week 2. They took on Illinois at home. Illinois won that one 31-23. Now, where UConn has improved this year, I think most significantly when you look at where they've gone from last year to this year, is defensively they are a much better team. At least so far, they've shown to be a much better team. That was really kind of the big thing that kept them in that game against Illinois for the beginning of that game was they had a pick 6 in that game, 3 total turnovers in that game. And they did a good job of limiting the Illinois running game, just 3.7 yards per carry for Illinois in that game. And considering IU's struggles on the ground, that's going to be an issue.
Yeah,
but offensively, it's just not a very good football
though, real
team.
Quick, I got to bring this up, Cole, because last year UConn gave up an average of 335 yards rushing per game.
Yeah, it's atrocious. Seemingly they've improved from that, but Illinois is not exactly a great quality Big Ten team, and there's only so much you can take away from a narrow victory at home against a team like Wagner. So we don't really know where this team sits at right now. And Wagner did run the football very effectively in that game, so it's not like Wagner was completely shut down. But, I do think that defensively they've improved. Now, granted, there's probably only one way for that team to go, which is up after what they did last season. But they've definitely improved defensively. Looking at this team offensively, they're going to have a new starting quarterback. Freshman Jack Sergaitis is going to be the new starter after, the last guy just pretty much was not getting the job done, had a pretty bad performance week one. Sergaitis stepped in against Illinois, played pretty well, 21 of 31, 275 yards, did have 2 interceptions. Like I said, it's a true freshman, 2-star recruit coming out of high school, but they saw some promise from him, so they're going to go with him the rest of the year. Really, there's only so much you can say about this team. After what IU did against Ohio State, Indiana should dominate this football game, all 3 phases. If UConn is hanging tough in this game, we have some very, very serious problems, because this might be one of the worst football teams in Division I football, and it's not really even close. So, again, IU, you'd like to see them dominate this game on the ground. Like you mentioned with the rushing stats last season were atrocious. Get Stevie Scott going. If you can't run the football on this team, you're not running the football on anyone all year long. That's going to be a problem. We're obviously going to monitor Michael Penix and see what his status is for this week. Tom Allen said he's going to be a game-time decision. Again, I don't know if he'll go. I'm not really expecting him to play, especially against a team like Conneticut. You should be able to trot Ramsey out there and still come away with a comfortable win. So I would not be surprised if they decide to give him another week off before they head into Michigan State for obviously a big game. But, yeah, I mean, Connecticut's just not a great football team, and IU really should dominate this game in all 3 phases.
All right, Cole. Anything else we want to talk about before we wrap this crap up?
No, I think
I think 12 minutes is plenty long to talk about the Ohio State game and the upcoming UConn battle.
I don't even think they deserve 12 minutes after the Ohio State game. There's only so much you can say. The only thing I'd finish just by saying is, with Indiana's struggles on the ground, I think obviously the big storyline for the rest of the year is going to be the health of Michael Penix, because I think if there's one thing that can maybe open up that running game for them moving forward, it's a big arm from Penix, get those big plays through the air, make the defense open up a little bit, and then maybe the offensive line can get a little bit pushed down low and you can get Stevie Scott going. I don't know if Peyton Ramsey has the arm strength to really force the defense to open up. It at least definitely didn't look that way against Ohio State. So the health of Penix is going to be something to monitor and watch going forward here.
All right, Cole. And if you're a Hoosier fan, you might be a Colts fan, make sure you check out Cole Hanna and Steve Risley on the Indianapolis Colts Weekly Show. You can find out on thegruelingtruth.com right now. Their game went much better than IU's did. You can check us every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock with the Indiana Football Weekly Show. So we'll be back next week to recap the Connecticut game, look ahead to Michigan State. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Cole Hanna, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.